It's my pleasure to welcome you to Mid-Career Crisis, Pivoting to a New Career Challenge. A few housekeeping items. You can find complete speaker bios located on the HOPA conference app, and we ask that you hold all your questions until the end. It's my pleasure to introduce your faculty. David DeRemer is an Assistant Director of Experimental Therapeutics, Clinical Associate Professor at University of Florida. Patrick Medina is a professor at the University of Oklahoma. Amy Pick is an Associate Professor of Pharmacy Practice at Creighton University. And Michael Wozniak is an Associate Director of Content and Training, U.S. Oncology Global Medical Affairs at Merck.
All right, thank you. So my name is Amy Pick, and I would like to welcome you to our presentation today. Here are our faculty disclosures. Most of us have no conflicts to disclose. However, our colleague Mike is at Merck right now. So some of you may be unaware of that, and that is one reason he's up here today talking about mid-career challenges. So when I look at the audience, 8 a.m., Saturday morning, and yet we have a pretty decent crowd, right? And so many of you, I'm assuming, have contemplated a career change. And for those that maybe haven't, I think there's probably two reasons. One is that you are just so overwhelmed, you've never stopped to think about what you're doing in your life. And then there's the second one that has become much more apparent to me recently after giving several talks, is that there are some that just don't believe that that's ever going to happen to them. And so that's what I think about when I think about mid-career challenges. So I am up here today with three fabulous, brilliant, remarkable colleagues, and we are going to discuss some of the challenges in addressing mid-career crisis. And so they are going to go through and talk about how they have transitioned from one career into another career. So we're going to go through the factors that led them to that decision, go through some of the factors that they had to consider when actually making that move. And let's be honest, we are pharmacists, right? We like black and white. We want to know and be 100% confident we're making the right decision. And with career challenges and changes, we're living in the gray. And so I think a lot of us have fear when we're thinking about considering a job change. And so after they talk, I'm going to come back and I'm going to discuss a little bit about career burnout. And so that is one reason why people contemplate a career change. And so we're going to go through burnout. And burnout, there's three factors to burnout that you have to be aware of as clinicians. We're going to go through burnout, and then I'm going to discuss well-being. I love well-being. I think it is something every pharmacist needs to be aware of, right? It affects every one of our patients every single day. And so I'll go through well-being, and then I'll talk about some ways maybe we can increase resiliency in the workplace. So I'm going to hand it over. Oh, before I do so, let's do some ARS. We were interested in knowing a little bit of demographics about our audience. So how many years have you been in your career? They're still coming in here, so I'll wait a little bit. Let's see if we can hit 75. All right, I'm going to move on. Oh. All right, so it looks like 11 to 20 years. And I would say that is probably what the literature would suggest, right, when we think about a mid-career crisis. We think about people in their, what we're learning is even late 30s, in your 40s and your 50s is when you start to think about, is this what I want to do for the rest of my life? Have you contemplated a career change in the past 2 years? And so that's just contemplated, not making a career change, but have you thought about, maybe I should go to industry. Maybe I should go to a PBM. Yes, wow. Overwhelming, right? Majority have said they have contemplated a career change. And I'm going to ask you, for those that said yes, why? So was it career dissatisfaction? Maybe you had a better opportunity. Finances. Needed something else to do. And maybe there's some other category. Maybe there's some other reason that led you to a different job. So career dissatisfaction. And let's see, needed something different to do. And I think that's what we're going to hear up here is from our three colleagues, that those are probably two of the primary reasons why they considered a career change and actually made that career change. So I'm going to hand it over to Patrick. He's going to talk a little bit about his career.
Good morning. Thanks, Hopa, for having me. And I got to admit, I'm a little more nervous than any talk I've ever given in Hopa before. I'm used to talking about progression-free survival, mechanism of action. And when kind of the idea for this talk percolated in the fall, I was a little hesitant because it's a little bit of a soft topic. So my part's called Now or Never, and hopefully you'll get the theme of that as we go through my part. So just a little bit about how I got to where I am. I graduated from Rutgers University in 1996. I did my PGY1 at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and did an oncology pharmacy fellowship with Susan Gooden at the Cancer Institute of New Jersey from 1997 to 1999, so quite a long time ago. And I've been at the University of Oklahoma ever since, and you can kind of see the progression of my career there. I started out as an assistant professor, tenure track. So my first position at the University of Oklahoma was a tenure track assistant professor position. Through there, I relatively quickly switched to non-tenure track, and we'll kind of go through how that kind of led to some of the decisions I made with my career. Got promoted, and then got promoted to full professor in 2015. And so I spent the 16 years there. And in 2015, I transitioned to director of pharmacy and a professor of medicine. So my academic appointment actually has changed from the College of Pharmacy to the College of Medicine in 2015. And then I've been there ever since. So it was tough to come up with an audience response question for this, but I did. So I have an audience response question for this. So what best describes your feelings and approach to your annual review, your performance annual review? So 1, you use it to set realistic goals and discuss measures for implementation. 2, you use it to justify last year's performance. C, fill out the paperwork to fulfill the requirement. D, copy and paste last year's, but change the dates and numbers as needed. So my eyes are... All right, so all across the board. I actually put this up for a reason. When I first did my annual reviews, I remember I came in as an assistant professor at the University of Oklahoma tenure track. And if I look at my actual annual reviews, which I've kept them all in a file, like I'm sure most of you have, my first 4 or 5 years of annual reviews, you would think I was setting the world on fire according to my department chair, right? I had no chance of not getting tenure. And the reason was no one really used it to set realistic goals and expectations. We used it just to look at last year and kind of goal plan for next year. But when the next year came, we didn't reflect on the goals from the year before. And so, it ended up starting to be where I would just kind of copy and paste goals, make the course better, have a better clinical practice, right? The standard things you're going to do, and then change the dates. And it kind of got to be a routine, and nothing ever happened, right? And so, that career path I started taking, we get in a rut. Everything kind of kept the same. And then when we got to the point of making a decision on tenure, non-tenure, some of those dissatisfaction things started coming out. Oh, well, how are you going to get tenure? You don't have a grant. Or how are you get? Well, you gave me ones for, we have ones through my performance eval for research. How do you explain those things? So I do, I'm going to encourage, and now as I do performance evals for the people I have, I try and, use this to set realistic goals for them when we do them, and not just getting that rut as now the person who does them, to guide those staff. My little picture doesn't show up. But what this is, so how I got here, I actually came up with as a pharmacist, a formula, a mathematical formula. And it's frustration equals expectations minus reality, right? And so the frustration in your position, if you're having frustration and contemplating your role, is what expectations did you have going into wherever you're at? And what's the reality? And how big that gap is how frustrated you can get at your position. And me and David talked, we tried to come up with, we don't want to kind of bash where we were necessarily, but certainly there was a frustration in my expectations. I came from the Cancer Institute in New Jersey with Susan Gooden, which some of you may know, where she basically did everything for that institution, and whatever she wanted happened. Came to the University of Oklahoma, right? And that wasn't the case. So my expectations finishing this fellowship, 2-year fellowship, in the lab, were pretty high. And the reality at OU, at least when I started, was a pretty big gap. And that frustration kind of grew. And so you can see the quote I have there, well, what can you do to change that frustration? Right? You can only do 2 things. You either need to change your expectations or change the reality. If you don't do anything to what your expectation is in that position, if I expected to go in there, being, working in the cancer center from day one, putting everything together for the physicians, working in the lab, if I don't change those expectations, my frustration is going to grow, or the reality. If you don't do anything to those 2 equations, nothing's going to change. Oh, there it is. It just shows up. So again, as a pharmacist, right, I came up with a little equation there. And so, some of the expectations I didn't set realistically, and this is going to be true as I transition to the new position. That formula does not go away. So just because you're considering a mid-career change, right? And as we saw, lots of you are considering that. You still have to go in and set that formula. Because that doesn't change. Just because you go somewhere else, your expectations of what you're going to do at that new position are going to be high, and the reality is going to be different. And so you're still going to have to mitigate that formula. And so in the College of Pharmacy, I didn't set the expectations early and discuss changes in the environment needed to close that frustration gap. So those performance reviews, those annual reviews, those were the time to address those reality and frustrations, and I didn't take advantage of that. And I put that blame on me, not necessarily the College of Pharmacy, to address that. I let institutional frustrations and external environment impact work life. A lot of people ask how I got to Oklahoma. I'm from Jersey, right? So if you hear a little Jersey accent, it kind of comes through depending on the word I say. Bagel, coffee, some of those words. So how did I get to Oklahoma? Well, I did my fellowship project with the current, actually, dean at the College of Medicine for Kentucky, so Bob DePaula, who's I did my fellowship project with in the lab. And he comes to me one day in the lab, he goes, "Hey, Pat, University of Oklahoma, they're going to build an NCI cancer center. They're interviewing me, to come be their director. Come with me. Come with me. We're going to change Oklahoma, right? I'm going to go in as director of the cancer center. You're going to come in as my Susan Gooden, right? High expectations, right? That's pretty high expectations. And you go in, well, of course he didn't take the job, right? So, right, I did. And during that tour at the cancer center, at what was just a floor of a big medical building, they showed me a model of the cancer center. This was 16 years ago, right? And so you saw when I left to work at the cancer center. So the expectation of me going to the University of Oklahoma was to work in an NCI level cancer center, which was what I was used to with my fellowship, right? And that institutional frustration I couldn't control. It took a long time for us, and we actually finally did get our NCI status this month, so it's finally happening. And so that affected my work life. And then you repeat the same pattern, right? I did the annual reviews. I took students certain months of the years. I had my course certain months of the years, and it just repeated. And so nothing changed. Like I said, if you don't change your expectations or your reality, nothing's going to change with your frustration at your current position. And then finally, I call this my annual Come to Jesus with Susan. I talk to Susan each year about kind of where I was in life, and I still talk to her about this. And, reflection of what I wanted my lasting impact to be in the pharmacy profession. At Oklahoma, I was at the College of Pharmacy. I think I did good things there. Students really appreciated it. It went well, but I saw an opportunity at the Cancer Center to make a lasting impact in Oklahoma. And so we have one of our pharmacists here. They had no clinical pharmacy program there. They had no retail pharmacy. IDS service was struggling through some of the things. And so I thought this was an opportunity for me to go into the Cancer Center and have a longer lasting impact. And that's why it was called Now or Never. I'm getting older in age, and I saw this as, if I didn't take this opportunity to take this director position there, someone was going to take it, right? And someone was going to take it and perhaps be there a long time, impacting my ability to move over. So, that had a big part of it. So some things to prepare for that change, I think, as you go. One is be proactive. And, I tried to do this as much as I could with the Cancer Center, even though that frustration was building, that I wasn't really involved in the Cancer Center officially. My academic appointment was 100% through the College of Pharmacy, so I had no official affiliation with the Cancer Center. But despite that, I tried to be proactive and keep my toe in the door at least. So I founded and chaired the Scientific Review Board at the Cancer Center about 14 years ago. There with one of their physicians. So for the last 14, 15 years, even before I moved over, I was in charge of the Scientific Review Board for the Cancer Center. I delivered a huge amount of education to the Medical Oncology and Gyn-Onc Fellowship program. Basically, whenever they asked me to do anything over there from an education standpoint, I did that. I developed prior authorization criteria with the State Medicaid Board, try to get some experience in diversifying what I could do. So whatever it is, whatever career you're considering transition into, you have to be proactive, for those people considering in making inroads in that. So let's say you're considering industry for a career change. One of the things I would advise you to, maybe do some advisory boards, or maybe do something to get your foot and be proactive in getting some experience for that. Keep your CV updated. Right? So just to do that. And diversify your skills. And I'm going to make a lot of plugs for HOPA here and a lot of plugs for the HOPA memberships. But really use HOPA to diversify your skills. If you're not comfortable in an area, go to those sessions. So rather than go to a session in your area maybe, go to the management sessions, go to the practice sessions, go to the sessions you're not comfortable with to diversify those skills. And use the HOPA programs that they have. The Practice Management Summit in September is a great opportunity for people who are considering, any type of move to administration to get some of that experience. So take advantage of HOPA for that. The leadership program last night from 5 to 7, HOPA is certainly looking to develop some of these things for us to get some experience. CE programs, additional degrees, certifications, I'm actually considering, like a master's or something like that, going back for that. So when I made the change, this is, what was my qualifications? People ask, how the hell are you a director of pharmacy, right? I'm a clinical pharmacist at OU for 16 years. And so I certainly came in with a certain skill set, which was a clinical pharmacy skill set, and have had to kind of learn the other stuff. And so it's been an interesting experience. So some pitfalls and tips, at least for my transition. One was the lack of true administration experience, budgeting, right? Things like that. I think, this is another opportunity for HOPA to help some of the clinical people who are moving into more management roles, budgeting, things like that. It just have been, a wide open experience, for me. Lack of human resource experience, doing those performance evaluations for like a technician level training person. I've never done them. Obviously I've done residency evaluations, but where your actual evaluation is tied to a promotion or a raise. Some of those issues that I've never had to deal with in this thing. And again, it's still the same equation. I went in with the expectation of, all right, I know what the Cancer Center needs. I'm a clinical pharmacist. I know a lot of people who do good work. We're going to go in from day one and change the whole way they practice at OU. And certainly that has been a little bit slower with some of that. Some tips, again, HOPA, networking. I really can't thank certain people enough. Some of them are in the audience. Joe Bubalo, Sally Barbara, North Carolina folks. I went and visited these cancer centers to get ideas. I went to North Carolina and Duke last year to kind of pick their brains about things. I can't think of her name. Nisha Griffin. I email her. I had an email that would call what the hell am I doing this week email. And it would be to a certain group of directors of pharmacy to kind of get that. But really, the HOPA network was invaluable. And so to those people who have helped me, certainly thank you. You catch more flies with honey. Again, I went in thinking I knew what they were doing wrong in every area that they were doing wrong in. And you go in thinking you're going to tell people who've been doing something a certain way. And of course, I think I was still right in what needed to be done. But going in and explaining that has been a process. And then working with your admin team and staff early, I've never had to work with finance, admin people, COOs, those types of people. Getting buy-in, becoming their allies early on has been something that I think has helped. So how's it going? That's the first day on the job. I just really had no idea how much work it would be to do that. And so, again, that expectation of me going in to fix our clinical program, and the reality of one of the first things I did was open a retail pharmacy, right? Again, expectations versus reality. And so there's been an overwhelming amount of kind of diversifying my talents, I'll call it. How's it going? So this is one of the things for Happy Bosses Day they made for me, so it was nice. When I started, we had 3 infusion pharmacists and 3 techs. And then we had 1 investigational pharmacist and 1 tech. And so in the 2 years, now we're up to 4 infusion pharmacists and 4 techs. We have the same investigational pharmacy team. We've implemented Velos for our investigational program. We started our clinical pharmacy program. We have now 4 clinical pharmacists. We had 0 when I started. One's here. We opened our retail pharmacy with 1 pharmacist and 1 tech. And I started and chaired, and currently still chair, the formal P&T committee, which we didn't have a formal P&T structure at OU. So that's, I guess we're going to take questions, at the end. Okay.
So to get us going here, we don't have to do an ARS question, but just show of hands, how many people have heard this term, trust the process? And I see it's almost become a fabric of our society, from political dysfunction to organizational dysfunction. A lot of people are using this term. So as you can see here, I have a question mark for myself. Any Cleveland Browns fans out there? A couple in the back. They know they can't trust the process because their organization chose to select Johnny Manziel for their first-round draft pick. Everybody knew that was a horrible decision. I think for the Cleveland Brown fan, they know they can't trust the process. Now, where does this term come from? If you actually look at a really high-quality journal like the Bleacher Report, it seems to have come from Mike's debacle of a basketball team. There was an individual named Sam Hickey who was the general manager, and I guess he still is? No, he left, no wonder. So they were purposely losing basketball games for years to basically enrich their draft status for some of the better players coming out of the college, as well as saving money and not buying free agents on the free market. And he coined this term, you've got to trust the process. So for me professionally, and where I was, it was like 2006, and I'll show you the slide where I started, but currently we had lost, my wife and I were number 66 and number 67 clinical pharmacists that had left the institution in 12 years. And 40 had left in about the last 4. So for me, it wasn't, I felt like I could no longer trust the process and I need to reject the process. So that's sort of my story. So the career timeline, here's my story. So basically residencies and fellowships way back when. So I'm approximately about 16 years out of residency experience. I started a job as assistant professor. And from an inpatient practice perspective, I was more of a inpatient leukemia BMT pharmacist. Our BMT unit was a small program, basically doing less than 50 transplants a year at that point. And then due to some structural changes with the program, with additions of pharmacists, I went to the outpatient where really we had no ambulatory care pharmacists in the heme setting. And I really felt that transition to be really difficult. Oftentimes people would ask me, how do you like the inpatient versus the outpatient? I really felt like I was a fish out of water for the first year, quite frankly. And no offense, I loved my residency training, but back in the day, there really wasn't any clinical pharmacists in ambulatory care settings. I really didn't feel like I had that training in a residency experience. I was sort of learning on the go. The associate professor, I got promoted. I was always non-tenure track, and this was in 2012. And one of the things, if I were you out there who were starting a career and thinking about, I'm going the academic route, teacher retirement programs. At what year do you become invested? So for the institution I was at, it was 10 years. And I saw, oh, this looks like a better financial investment for myself. Yeah, it's 10 years, but I don't think, for me, I was itching to go around 6-7 year mark. And basically, I felt I was basically there to accrue the money in the teacher's retirement program. And I really think that's sort of good life advice. So I wanted to hit the reset button around 2016 when I basically got invested into the teacher's retirement program. Now, this was mentioned last year. If you went to the ethics talk, one of the non-pharmacist panel members that Donald Harvey had on stage talked about this study in it was in BBMT. I loosely characterize myself as a boomer pharmacist. Obviously, these individuals are oftentimes in high-stress environments, but one thing that came out when they looked at other disciplines is that pharmacists were the most morally stressed and most emotionally exhausted at various standards. So it was approximately about 53% of pharmacists were emotionally burned out compared to their peers. So is it just a BMT thing? Well, there was a hospital pharmacy article that came out this past December where they looked at about 900 pharmacists in a clinical setting. As usual, we only had about a 10 to 11% survey response, so we had about 90 pharmacists. And subsequently, once again, that shows that clinical pharmacists, particularly in a younger population, who are, I think, residency preceptors, board certification, who were working more than 50 hours, clearly stood out as somebody who was having burnout issues. So they characterize these individuals, whether they had no burnout or burnout, and they asked them this question: am I currently satisfied with my career in transplant? So for myself, if this is going to work, okay. Nope. So I was probably the sliver there at the bottom for no burnout, and I really didn't feel I was quote unquote satisfied in my current career, but I didn't necessarily consider myself as burned out. I just thought I needed to do something different. So here I was in my personal trek. Either I stayed where I was at, and I really felt like it was a dead end because I felt in my day-to-day that I was basically doing a lot of drug procurement, a lot of med recon, and none of which of these daily activities were ever discussed on my annual review. None. And from a hospital college perspective, 100% of my salary was paid for the college, and I spent about 85% of my day in a hospital setting. And for me, that it was always a challenge. And I know I see some faces out there, and we've all experienced these challenges. So this was my personal GPS at the time. In the academic world, we always talk about strategic planning. And I really feel like when I would try to do either my own strategic planning, that I've sort of lacked a strategic direction. Where am I going? And that's really just where I was at. Over the years, I saw the deterioration of a college health systems administration relationship. Oftentimes, I had two bosses, sometimes of which would not speak to one another. And I saw that happen over due to organizational changes. Institutional culture, we had lost a cancer center director, and about 15 of our oncologists left within a 3-year window, and that also incorporated surgical oncologists, radiologists, those adjunctive staff members. So there always seemed to be sort of a negative institutional culture that we can never get over. And I think for healthcare professionals, and we saw it percolate to patient care. The patients would talk about it. And with that institutional culture change, I lost many of my collaborators. Lack of collaborative practice agreements. I thought we had a great pharmacy staff, but it didn't seem like we ever made inroads in sort of more traditional, modernized clinical or collaborative practice agreements. Am I valued? I hate to sound like a millennial there when I say that, but I am a Gen Xer. Am I valued, and did I provide value? So when I left, the college didn't replace me. The hospital didn't replace me. And, how does that make me feel? Something to think about. And then, meanwhile, you come to this meeting, and you come to these talks, and you have all these great things that everybody else is doing around the country. So sometimes hope is a great networking, but oftentimes it's a reality check. So tips to consider when contemplating change: know your priorities and needs. As you guys probably went to the Hope Award of Excellence, Donald Harvey is making some waves nationally. And a couple cancer center directors had approached Donald about, hey, we want somebody like you. And Donald has been graciously enough to throw around some names, and some of us have gotten jobs in sort of phase 1 settings, and this is sort of how I got this job. There's a physician who works at our institution, his name is Dr. Tom George. He's very collaborative, and just met Donald at a whim, and Donald started throwing out some names, and I met Dr. George, and here I am. So having that existing network, and I've known Donald for years. And, I spent some time with Winship, much like Pat was talking about, going out and sort of talking to other people in the various parts of the country and sort of finding out what you can do. So I spent several days in their phase 1 center. And then with this, I did some research about what Winship was doing good, what Donald sort of warned me about with this career change. And for that, I prepared. So then and now, here's my title, then and now. So as you've already heard, I have this sexy title of an Assistant Director of Experimental Therapeutics, and nobody knows what the hell it is. And then you throw the incubator program in there, and you're like, what is that? So in theory, I'm supposed to align some of the College of Pharmacy expertise as it relates to basic science into some of these correlatives and clinical trials. I went from heme to solid malignancies, and that's something I never thought I would do. And if any of you guys are participating in the DART trial, so I'm a sub-I on the DART trial, and it's basically these rare malignancies, and I'm thinking, whoa, some of these malignancies I've never seen before. So that's been a challenge. Going from a certain institution to Epic, for years, I've come to these meetings and heard all the positivity with people who have an Epic institution. And us Cerner folk felt like, oh man, I wish we had Epic. I'll publicly state here, I love Cerner now. I went from being an RPD to a residency preceptor. I haven't done pharm academic in months. And I don't miss it a bit, and it's been a nice change. It's been a nice change not to do the pharm academic. And then you can see here, I was a member of the Cancer RB for several years at the old institution. Now I'm on the SRMB and the Data Integrity Safety Committee, so it does diversify your skills. It does provide a great deal of work. Our SRMC basically meets every 2 weeks, or you're assigned a protocol. You have to give a review every 2 weeks, so that's a lot of work outside the context of your day-to-day responsibilities. Early successes, I really feel like I now have a defined strategic direction. I feel like our College of Pharmacy is a little more in tune with where they're going and what they want to become. Established a collaborative career mentor. As I've already mentioned, I lost some of my mentors, like Farouk, anybody from Ohio State? Farouk Awan, that was my mentor, and then Gillette Houston, who works in Minnesota. So I lost a lot of my physician collaborators. I feel like my culture aligns with my personal interest, more of a research focused. I went from a university that had $48 million in NIH dollars last year to one that has 153. So there really isn't a push for additional research for College of Pharmacy members. New opportunities. Within literally the first month, I was asked to go represent the Cancer Center because the director was not going to be there. So it was my first time at the NCI. That would have never been offered to me, never, in my own institution. This was offered to me in my first month, and this is oftentimes where I get to see Donald and drink with him. Initial challenges, I moved to Florida in Hurricane Irma week 2. And I'm not saying this is going to happen to you, but expect the unexpected, particularly if you're moving. We tried to evacuate, and there was no gas, and then you're stuck, and you have 2 kids. You're looking at an oak tree that may land on you during the night, so that was a challenge. Personal issues, so my wife, she's a PharmD, so trying to find those positions with either, particularly in smaller markets, sometimes it's more difficult to find 2 pharmacy positions in the same institution. She loves her job so much better than what she had before, too, so it's been symbiotic for both of our changes. Children, if you have children, this is a disaster. My 9-year-old daughter, we moved to Florida, for God's sake. I have the gold Disney card. Gold Disney card. Limited blackout dates. We spent a lot of time in Orlando. And every week I get to hear, Dad, I want to move back to Georgia with my friends. It's tough. Real estate. I didn't expect our house to be on the market for 5 months, but it has. So now I want to buy a house because we just sold our house 5 months ago. Now, the Fed's going to raise the interest rates. You're hearing a lot about that. So, that's another challenge. And then delineating my role, that's sort of, now like clinical research coordinators respond to me. I have these reports that people report to me. I don't even, when I started, I didn't really have an idea what they did on a day-to-day basis. So personal future, I've been on this job for about 7 months, and here I am again. And sometimes I say this to my wife, and literally I get hit. What about our next move? What are we going to do? So in the academic setting, do you want to become a department head? Do you want to become a dean? If you stick in the healthcare system, do you want to go higher in the chain with the Cancer Center? So some of those things I still percolate and sort of think about. But at this point, I feel like in the day-to-day basis, it sort of better matches my skill set as well as it better matches my interest. So I feel like I'm in a better place at this point than I was last year. So with that, we turn to Darth.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone. All right, a little better. Good morning. All right. So I have to give credit to David for the title of my presentation. So he came up with that. And so I want to thank the program committee, David for asking me to do this, Amy for asking me to do this. So I think it's really important. Last night, some of us did attend the leadership session last night, and the topic of career transition was part of the workshop that we did. So I think this is really timely. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my career. Prior to moving to my current position, I had some transitions at my academic institution that I'll briefly touch on. So here's a table of what I did as part of my career. So the top in terms of I call them my real jobs, and down below my involvement with HOPA. And really, these were overlapped, and I think both were mutually important to me at the time and really helped to open doors and opportunities and really to put me where I am today. So you can see where my training is. My first real job out of residency was an oncology clinical specialist at the Hospital University of Pennsylvania. My first job was not my dream job. I took that job because of the opportunity, and really the opportunity came. So for those of you that are thinking about a career, those that are finishing residency, it's about thinking, what is the opportunity where I go? Unfortunately, Patrick mentioned he thought the opportunity, there was going to be a key person there leading the center there. That didn't pan out. So it's about making the most of your opportunities, and I'll talk a little bit about that. You can see there I spent some time in Gyn-Onc. Wasn't my dream job, but then there was the opportunity and really identified the needs of the patients on the Med-Onc service were greater than the needs on the Gyn-Onc service. So switched to that. And then there were some changes in my institution in terms of who was there, and some pregnancies and births, and so the opportunity to go to more really what I wanted to do, leukemias, lymphomas, and allogeneic stem cell transplant opened up, and I rolled to that position. Our institution was going under a lot of growth. We had changed our pharmacy practice model to, we had always had decentralized pharmacy services, but went to a unit-based clinical pharmacy model. So we went from probably having a clinical pharmacist staff of maybe 30 or 40 to now probably being right around 100. So that necessitated the need to have additional managers, and so the opportunity to be associate director opened up. And I'll talk about my decision tree for there in a little bit. As you can see there for HOPA, was really instrumental, a lot of involvement with committees, and that really started to open the doors of connections, learning from others as you're on those committees, what are they doing, and then obviously 2 stints on the board of directors, and I'll talk about that more, about the opportunities that opened in terms of making connections. So looking at the role transition factors for me, within the role of clinical specialist, I'll be selfish, and this may, it was about, I wanted more responsibility. I wanted to do more, and I knew that there was the opportunity to do more. The second thing there probably is something that has stuck with me to this day, is that drive to be the best. And I think always being very conscious that you're not the best, that there are smarter people around you, but how do you build your team? How do you have a great team while striving and motivating yourself to be the best? I talked about department need, personal area of interest, touched on that. And at that time, my personal life had a lot of flexibility. So was married, no kids. It was very common. I was at the hospital looking at patients, spending time with oncology residents until 7, 8 o'clock at night. That was the normal. And then as we all know, if you have children, that first baby comes, things change. It's that perfect time to realign your priorities. And that kind of came around, I think, when I transitioned to associate director. At that time, I had 3 children, so was looking for a little bit of a different work-life balance. So again, the time when I switched to associate director, it was really, how can I challenge myself? More responsibilities, but in a different platform or different venue. Professional development, new challenges. So Patrick touched on this. HR, my HR representative was my best friend. And she was tremendous in really using the examples that were occurring at the time to teach me. So if you have the opportunity to become a manager or a leader in whatever setting, find out who your HR person is, because they have a wonderful skill set that they want to teach you. And it was really a great opportunity for me to learn. Where should you have your chair in your office when you're meeting with one-on-ones? I don't think any of our offices in our pharmacy administration were set up well. My desk was here, the door's there. There's somebody in your way. That person, if they get angry at you, you have no exit. It was like, well, I don't think they're going to move this barricaded, drilled into the wall desk furniture for me. So I was like, okay, what am I going to do? Not that I had a lot of confrontations, but it's just that mindset. If you don't think about it, you think everything's going to be peaches and cream, but it's not always that way. Bigger stage, so again, went from really working with a team in oncology, probably under 10 people, to a larger department and a lot more responsibility. And I think for that time, I had worked in oncology for about 9 years, and I think I was ready for a change as well. So some lasting impressions from my career. The first quote there is from my former assistant dean at the School of Pharmacy, the University of Pittsburgh. His name's Gary Stower. He recently retired from the School of Pharmacy in Buffalo. And we had a Professions of Pharmacy class, and I forget which year it was, and he said, your first job is not going to be your last job. And that just stuck with me all this time. And until probably about a year ago, maybe, prior to that, I didn't really know what that meant, right? I had switched from a clinical specialist to associate director, but to me, it wasn't really changing jobs. I was at the same place, right? And so as I started to look to my current position, it really started to resonate to me of your first job is not your last job. And you could probably think about that with your personal life too, as things change in your personal life. And then the second quote's from my father. And I don't remember exactly what year he said this to me, but I could tell you exactly where I was standing in our pharmacy department. I was standing up, and I think it was at the time when our hospital was considering opening up a clinical coordinator position, and it never came to fruition. But I remember talking to my dad, and he's a CPA, so trying to explain what you do to somebody who's not in the profession, we all know it's a little bit of a challenge. And he's like, well, Mike, I know what you do now. What's next? What can you do? And I was like, well, there's associate director, and then, the highest thing you can do in a hospital pharmacy is be a director of pharmacy. And he's like, well, do you want to do that? And at the time, I was like, no. So I was like maybe 4 or 5 years into my clinical specialist career, and things changed. I became an associate director, but it was that type of thinking of, you need to think ahead. What do you want to do? And how do you get there? So these are similar themes that Patrick and David touched on, really staying in touch with mentors and colleagues. Mo Schwartz has been great. I remember as I was getting closer to making a decision, kind of frantically calling her, texting her, emailing her, say, can we talk? And it's about exactly what Amy said. You want to make that decision that you know is perfect and have as little risk as possible. Constantly build your network. Again, I'll put a plug in. HOPA has been great, and it's been a wonderful opportunity to engage people and really help me as I made my transition into industry. And the last thing I have here is the HOPA Industry Relations Council. So when Susanna opened up the conference, you may have seen the slides of the IRC representatives from the companies. So that group of companies has really grown over the past few years. But really, as part of the board, you have the opportunity to sit in the room with these individuals from various companies. And so I said, as you serve on the board, it's a volunteer, but what can I get out of this? And so I purposely said, I'm really going to take the time to engage a lot of folks from these different companies, and had some sit-down meetings with folks to really try to understand their company better. One, how can HOPA work with them better, but also from a personal perspective of, what can I do in industry? What are those roles in industry? And that really opened my eyes of what are the opportunities for a pharmacist in industry. So on this slide, this is not an all-encompassing slide of what those opportunities are in industry. These are just the glimpse of what I have seen prior to making the jump into industry, and then also from my own eyes once I've been with the company I've been with for the past 8 months. But obviously medical affairs, so that's the department I work in now. Medical information, a great springboard. A lot of folks that I worked with at the Hospital University of Pennsylvania took on roles in medical information companies, regulatory affairs, commercial, marketing components, and then obviously field. So I think most of us, depending on your setting, this is probably the industry personnel that you probably are most closely can think of when you think of industry as, oh, who's my MSL for this company? And again, if you meet with them, opportunity, many of them they may be newer in their careers. Folks that I've gotten to know at my company, they've been in the industry for 15, 20 years. So just to kind of talk to them, and they have really great insight about the area. Headquarters, so I'm a headquarters-based role. So obviously there's strategy positions of the folks that really take the product and say, what are we going to do with this? Operations, and then where I work in content and training. So where to start to look for opportunities? Network and word of mouth. I think, it's like kind of touching your toes into the ocean water. Is it cold? Is it warm? Do I want to go in the whole way? Put your toes in the water if you want to. But it's really starting to talk to people, and it's okay. It's not, part of when I made the jump, it was, gosh, am I cheating on HUP? Just thinking about it. And I had to overcome that a little bit of, gosh, I've been in the hospital for 14 years, and I felt guilty about it because I love my institution, still love it, look back upon it fondly. But word of mouth, LinkedIn, many of you are probably well more versed than I am in LinkedIn, but every week I think I get an email about here are opportunities in your area. So look at those. Start to get look at those job descriptions just to get a sense of what are those qualifications. Does that fit my bill or not? Recruiters. It's not necessarily a venue that I've used. I think we probably always have gotten those emails, but many components of industry heavily utilize recruiters, so something to consider. And then finally, the company career website. So depending on your location, something that you may want to think about of is there a company in your region? Do you want a field position? Is there positions open in my area? So some factors to consider: the culture of the company. And you probably can't appreciate the culture until you fully have jumped in with 2 feet and you're there. But I think for me, those are the type of questions I try to ask on interviews, and I think it just exudes from people when you talk to them. You can tell how engaged they are. And to me, I think that's a reflection of what the culture may be. The product line, so what product may you be supporting? Also, what's down the road? So is this company a one and done? Are they smaller and it seems like they're going to look like they're just going to hold out until they get bought out? So some of those factors. Financials, job stability. So again, we have to get paid. We have to make money. We have to put food on the table. What's the leadership like at that company? Can you see yourself working for the leaders that are there? Do they align with your core values as well? And then your level of risk. And so I threw this up there because one of my very close friends from middle school, he's worked in industry for well over 10 years. And his life situation, my life situation is very different. And his level of risk is much higher than mine. And he's worked in smaller pharmaceutical companies that probably 5 of the companies he's worked for have gotten bought out. He gets a huge severance package. Okay? Personal, his life, his spouse works, my spouse doesn't work. So if I lose a job, I'm not ready to take that level of risk. So that's something you really have to think about on your side. What's in your personal life and what's your level of risk? Position factors there, you can read those quickly. I'll say depending on the position, the travel requirement is something to consider. And I think, again, with your personal life, Patrick was just saying, he's on his flight to home, and then he's driving 5 hours to Kansas City. So how do you do those things? Is that something that's in your wheelhouse that your family life can support? And then finally, the opportunity for growth and promotion. In hospital, it was vertical. There wasn't too much horizontal growth. My eyes have been very wide open with my new position. There's a lot of opportunity for both vertical and horizontal. There's 2 people that I work with at my company that have worked for the company for about 17 or 18 years. They joined medical affairs in the past year. Prior to their current positions, they've been through probably 4 or 5 different roles at our company. It's a culture of open arms. They want you to make those changes. They want you to grow professionally, and it's something that's actually encouraged. So, I have an N of 1 experience with one company, so I don't want to make a blanket statement, but certainly something you want to look for in terms of challenging yourself. So finally, it came down to, should I stay or should I go? We could cue up the music, but I don't think I'm that savvy to cue the music. But as I said, the vertical growth, at the time, our director of pharmacy position was open, and I knew the hours I was putting in, my current role as associate director, and it wasn't like my hours were going to get any shorter. And having 3 young kids, it wasn't what the opportunity that I was looking for at the time. And so, financially, sure, if I made that decision to apply for that job, maybe it would have been more money, probably. But ultimately, I did decide to seek the new opportunity, industry, and it was really came down to I wanted to challenge myself professionally in a new environment. So it was the opportunity. I talked about this before, the professional development. A few folks that I've met with and asked how the new job is going. I've shared this adjective. I would say the shift for me personally in the work-life balance has been cataclysmically better. I used to leave my house around 6:30 in the morning, come home 6:30, 7 o'clock at night. Now I'm, probably I get in the office the same time. My commute is shorter. I can work from home on certain days, so a lot of flexibility. I've been able to attend many more of my children's events, which has correlated to a happy spouse. So it's been positive. Again, these are all things as you're considering what does it look like for you. New environment. Obviously, work in oncology, so as I transitioned to my associate director position, it wasn't just in oncology, it was for all areas of the hospital. As many of you all here, you're all here for a reason, passion for oncology, so I'm really happy to be back working in the oncology arena. Longevity with a company. So I worked at HUP for 14 years. I wanted to pick a company that I could see myself working at for a long period of time. I don't personally want to jump around from company to company. So that was part of my decision-making process of, is this a company I can see myself working for another 14, 15 years and beyond? So what happened, you can see my role there. So I do help to support hematology, women's cancers, melanoma. I also help to support one area of our field medical team, our health system oncology medical affairs directors. I was heavily involved with our residency program at HUP. Have also gotten the opportunity to help support our PharmD fellowship program at our company. I think David's reset button on his slide was perfect. It is hitting the reset button. You have lots to learn, lots to give. Talked about the work-life balance. They have a great culture of recognition. This probably varies from your own, if you're working in the hospital setting. It's not just aligned there. So as I was thinking about this presentation, I really, as pharmacists, we're kind of data-driven. I want to say, is there any data out there about career transitions, making moves to industry? And so I found this article that was published in Forbes. You can see there are 10 reasons successful people change jobs more often. And I guess I don't know if I'm successful or not, and I certainly didn't change jobs often, but it was the closest thing that I could find that resonated with me. And as I read these, I think if I had looked at this article 2 years ago when it was published, I don't know if these would have hit me as much as they hit me after I had made my change. But you could see there, we learn the most when we are least competent. And I would say walking into my new role, new company, you're like, gosh, nobody knows who I am. I mean, some people knew who I was. It was a new job, had to learn all these new policies, and you just have this sense of, I don't know what I'm doing, right? But it causes you to really stimulate yourself and motivate yourself. Just 2 days ago, I was working on something, and my boss said, "Hey, Mike, we probably didn't have to do it that way, so let's talk about it." And so she's been very supportive, very helpful, and that's been positive in terms of my onboarding and my learning. So it's been a great culture. Every time you change jobs, you get to and have to reestablish your value. Absolutely true, but it's a great opportunity in my company, and it's not about are you a PharmD, MD, PhD. You're on a level playing field, and people want your contributions. They want you to speak up. So, that's where I noticed the difference from the hospital setting of, I would say it's common to defer to the physicians because ultimately they have to make the orders. And so it's been a change of much more collaboration. And I know we're kind of short on time. But when you stay put in one job, you kind of get complacent is the take home. It doesn't really force you to get new fresh glasses. Then the final one, the longer you stay in one company, the more set and solid your box becomes. You become your own worst enemy. And this probably resonated with me the most. I think for as much as I tried to continue to do new things and do a good job, you kind of get siloed. You kind of drink your own Kool-Aid a little bit. And so it's been a great opportunity making a change. So final thoughts. I think these are probably very similar to what other folks have put there, but identify your motivation for considering a change. And I think the initial ARS question that Amy put up about, why? Is it financial? Are you not happy? Really think about why you're making the change. And so you can be well confirmed of making that change. Learn the good, the bad, and the ugly. This reminds me of the quote from my wife when we went to the Eagles parade after the Super Bowl, because we certainly saw the good, the bad, and the ugly there at the parade that day. But really, you want to learn all those components so that there's no surprises when you start that new job of, oh, geez, I didn't know it was like this. You want to ask those questions. For me personally, this is not a scientifically validated analysis, but I did my what-if analysis. What if I do this? What if I do this? What if I stay in my job? What does that mean? And ultimately, hit the reset button, start building a new foundation, and be excited and open-minded. You know, it's hitting that reset button for a reason, but be excited and demonstrate your passion. So thank you for your time, and I'll turn it over to Amy to finish us off.
All right, thank you, Mike. So I am bringing a different perspective. These gentlemen have transitioned and made some transitions. I am still sitting, I'm in my 40s, and I'm still sitting as thinking, what do I want to do when I grow up? I don't know. And I'm telling that to the world, I don't know what I want to do. Here's my timeline. You know, growing up, I'm the type A person, very self-motivated, intrinsic motivation, you know, get a BS in biochemistry, molecular biology, go to pharmacy school, do a pharmacy practice residency. My first position, I had a colleague call me and say, hey, there's 50 opening up at this university. I think you'd be a great candidate. So I applied. It was actually supposed to be an ambulatory care position. In my interview, I learned that it was going to be inpatient. I'd be the first clinical pharmacist in the institution, in the whole community hospital. And so I was like, oh, you know, out of school, I'm going to take that. As you can see at the top here, in 2006, I had my first child. I have 4 boys. They're ages 12, 10, 8, and 5, going to be 5. And it was in 2008 where I had probably had my first mid-career crisis. I came back from maternity leave. I had 2 young boys. And I came back on a Monday. I had P&T at 7 a.m. On Thursday, and I had a sick kid. And you know what I did? Looking back, I feel terrible, but I'm going to tell you. I took my child to a sick kid daycare. It was called Under the Weather. I showed up, and they said, does he have GI or respiratory? I said, GI. Perfect. And they took him. I went to work. I was there by 7 a.m. I got to work, and someone said, who'd you leave him with? I'm like, I don't know. He's over at Bergen Mercy Hospital at a sick kid daycare. That was the first one when, looking back, I said, I can't believe I'm doing this. A couple weeks later, I had a meeting at 7 o'clock, a cancer committee meeting at 7 o'clock, and I sat on IRB, and IRB went to 7 p.m. My husband works for a Fortune 500 company out of Omaha. He does a lot of travel. He was traveling 2 weeks out of the month. And so I had to get my child to daycare at 6:30, and I didn't know how I was going to pick him up because daycare closed at 6. And I cried, and I still remember, it brings tears to my eyes. I cried and cried and cried, and I said, I cannot live like this. And so the next day, my boss actually sent an email out saying, hey, I'm looking for someone to assume some more responsibilities. I need some more teaching. And I called him up and I said, I'm your person. I said, with one stipulation. I said, I have to reduce my hours. I have to go to 80%. He went, talked to the dean, came back and said, absolutely not. And I said, that's right, I'm leaving. It's okay. And they said, where are you going to go? And when you're in Omaha, Nebraska, and you're working for Creighton, you throw out the big gun, right? I'm going to Nebraska Medical Center. I trained there. I worked BMT there. I'm going back there. And they said, oh, we can't lose a BCOP to Nebraska Medicine. And I said, perfect. And so they reduced my hours. In 2014, I had some added responsibilities of Director of Faculty and Staff Development. This came out of left field. And honestly, it hit me at one of the weakest times in my life. My second child was diagnosed with juvenile idiopathic arthritis. I didn't know what was going on. We thought maybe it was rheumatic fever, reactive arthritis, but he wasn't able to walk. And I get a call saying, hey, they're looking at you to do Director of Faculty and Staff Development for pharmacy, occupational therapy, and physical therapy. And I said, I can't do this. And again, my department chair said, do it, man. Do it 1 year. Just take this leadership position. So I said, okay. And so I did that, and what I realized is, again, I think we've heard this, we're not really taught in school how to be a leader, right? And leadership is much different than management. And so understanding what is it like to lead. And so what I realized is I had insufficient knowledge on what is it like to be a leader. So I ended up enrolling in 2016 in a Master's of Science in Organizational Leadership. And I have 9 hours left to complete this degree. And what I've learned is that there's so much area for growth. We need really, really good leaders out there. And again, it's much different than management. So that's sort of where I'm at. I'm trying to figure out what's calling. I have an internal restlessness, and I don't know what it is. There's something more out there for me. And so I'm waiting. I'm waiting for that opportunity to maybe pause and reset. So what I want to talk about is sometimes we do make career changes because of better opportunities, frustration. But when you look at the literature, there's a growing body of literature talking about clinician burnout. The National Academy of Medicine has actually a workshop in May in DC talking about clinician burnout and well-being. When we look at pharmacists, again, we've heard some of the literature coming out. We know pharmacists have a higher than average suicide rate. They attribute that to probably a little bit of burnout. And the same with substance abuse, right? We know that pharmacists have at least 20% higher incidence of substance abuse than the general population. And again, is that burnout? So I'm going to bring up an ARS question here. I feel a great deal of stress because of burnout, or stress because of my job. And we'll do this quickly here, just in the sake of time. And I'm going to follow up with another ARS question here. Wow, strongly agree. So most of us every day probably have some degree of stress in our job. What about burnout? And we haven't defined what burnout means, but do you think that you experience burnout during the week? All right, so sometimes, often. So let's go through, maybe one more. Word cloud. I don't know if this is going to work here. We're going to see if this works. In 3 words or fewer, what are your biggest factors that contribute to stress or even burnout? Can you type that in? We're going to try this. All right, so you can see here that the larger the word, that means that more people have put that word in. So we see work, right? Work's coming up, saying that contributes to stress. Family, certainly family, right? Raising children, aging parents, taking care of a spouse, a sick child. Workload. We heard it numerous times from Patrick. Expectations. What's my expectations? So there's a difference between stress and burnout. And so here's stressed Eric, and bless this illustrator's heart, she was willing to let me present this today here. Here is stressed Eric. Burnout Eric they were too tired to pose for this picture here. And that's what we think about when we think about burnout. Now, don't get me wrong, there's some degree of stress we all need. Right? We think about those people, and I know you can think about the people that say, wow, they got a great life, right? Stress-free, they're sitting at home, they maybe get up for work at 11 and they're home by 2, stress-free. We know that productivity increases when we have some degree of stress. And so we want some degree of stress. And so when you hit that optimum stress level, we see increased job performance. And actually, you see a slightly increase, in our cortisol levels, right, with stress. With time, though, as you progress to burnout, so you are overly stressed, you are exhausted, emotionally exhausted, we actually see our cortisol levels drop. And so we see adrenal fatigue. And so we want to make sure that we have optimum stress and we're not burnout. Christina Maslick is probably the leading researcher on burnout. And so we see the Maslick burnout inventory. You can go online, you can take a series of surveys on burnout depending on your position. So you could be, if you're an academician, if you're a healthcare provider, if you're a student, you can take these surveys to assess burnout. There's currently a burnout survey circulating, right, among women in pharmacy about burnout. And so what we know about burnout, there's 3 factors that are part of this syndrome. We think about emotional exhaustion. We are tired. We are physically tired, but we are emotionally tired. You might see some detachment, right? You have to be concerned when you see colleagues that do not come out to lunch, that stay in their office, that you never see. They're detaching from people. We want people to detach from work, not from others. We start to see cynicism, right? Cynical. Oh, I don't trust your motives. You're against me. You know, all humans are bad. We see cynicism. And then with that, we also see a decrease in self-efficacy, both personally and professionally. We begin to doubt ourselves. We don't have confidence. We're unwilling to make changes. And with that, we see decreased engagement. So again, Maslick has probably the most extensive research out there on burnout. So what can we offer you? We think about strategies for resiliency is probably part of that. I think you have to talk about well-being then. And again, I have colleagues, I love to talk about well-being, and they'll say, pick, there's no such thing. You know, well-being, how can you ever address that? Well, CDC, I always bring this out. I said the CDC has a website on well-being. Every healthcare provider should be concerned about well-being because it affects disease prevention, it affects treatment and health promotion. And so we know that what people want is they want to have a meaningful life. And so we have to be concerned about well-being. I love Gallup. I'm going to be the first to admit that I love Gallup. I love Gallup Strength Finders. Donald Clifton has some great information on Strength Finders. Rath and Harder have a lot of information about well-being. And so there's different factors and different elements depending on whose literature you use. But when you look at well-being, Gallup would say there's 5 elements of well-being. The first is career. You have to love your career. You have to love what you do. And I say this because sometimes we do what we do because of others. Because I started off as a music major because they said, you play 5 instruments. You should be a music teacher. Is that what you want to do? And so find a career that you want to do. You have to have physical activity, so you have to be able to get out, and you have to be active. You have to have a strong engagement with your community. You have to feel connected where you live. You have to have a strong social network. You have to have friends. You have to be able to socialize with them. And there's a financial aspect of it. And it's not a degree of money, but it's what can you do, how much money do you have so that you can live your life with fulfillment. So those are the essentials of well-being here. Some strategies to increase resiliency. We have a couple minutes left here, but I'm going to talk about gratitude. I think that is the one that's been the most helpful for me. So doing a gratitude journal every day. Well, actually, the literature says do not do it every day, probably 3 times a week. Take time to find 3 things that you are most grateful for. And that should be something, not about you, about others. Yesterday, I loved talking with Ela and Christy. I loved it. They make me realize why HOPA is such a great organization. Jot that down, document it, have a physical record. We know that when you think about gratitude, it evokes positive emotions, right? And so that increases your well-being. When you think about mindfulness, taking time to step back, think about the moment. Oh my gosh, I'm standing here right now at HOPA. I'm looking at the audience, taking time to recognize the emotions and the feelings. We know that can increase our well-being. Meditation, even if it's 5 minutes, taking time to breathe. And honestly, I think meditation is difficult. It requires time and it requires a lot of practice. And with time, you can extend that to maybe 15 or 20 minutes here. The last thing I want to say about more myself, and then we'll have about maybe 5 minutes or so for questions, is when you think about a career change, you must think about your purpose in life. And so last summer, I read a book called Heroic Living, Discovering Your Purpose. And so I urge every one of you to say, what is my purpose in life? For most of us, our purpose isn't really pharmacy. There's probably an underlying purpose. For me, I have a mission statement. My purpose is to use my God-given talents to inspire, to develop, and serve others. That is my mission. My job should align with those values. And the other thing I would say is you have to have a creed. What values are you willing to compromise and sacrifice, and what are the most important? And make sure that your job then aligns with that. And so I want people, faith, family, friends are very important. I want respect. I want to be treated fairly. Find out what what aligns with those values. And so I think Mike talked about, finding an organization, that culture that fits who he is. So I would encourage you to take time, in the next couple days, because otherwise you put it on the back burner, right? Take time to figure out who you are, and then find a career that fits with that. I want to wrap up with a quote. I think we've hit about HOPA. Use your HOPA networks to help you with career challenges, with career crisis. We have wonderful colleagues here. I think if you're a manager of a pharmacy or a leader in pharmacy, ask your followers, what do you want? What are your goals? How can I get you to those goals? Make sure that you're focused on others instead of yourself or where you want to go. So the last one I want to end up is a quote from Scott Peck. And it's, the truth is that our finest moments are most likely to occur when we are feeling deeply uncomfortable, unhappy, or unfulfilled. For it is only in such moments, propelled by our discomfort, that we are likely to step out of our ruts and start searching for different ways or truer answers. And I think that nicely summarizes it. We do have to address the discomfort and maybe search or seek for some different career options. So we have about 3 minutes here for questions. We intended it to have much more engagement, I think, here, but we want to hear from you in the last 3 minutes. What do you feel? What are your challenges? Where do you want to go? So the
I've got some stuff going on and all that, and I'm trying to determine, am I just suffering? Is this just burnout, or is this something more pathologically involved?
For those,
How can you tell the difference?
so for those participating in our virtual presentation here, the question is, how do you decide or determine what is burnout and what is depression? Actually, when you are burnout, we see depression and anxiety. And so depression is a component or a result of burnout. And so most would say, even APHA has information on their website now for pharmacists that if you're burnout, you need to seek attention from a medical provider. Let's address either the anxiety or the depression. See if that helps. See if we can have some behavioral modifications, meditation, mindfulness, and does that help? Honestly, you might get to the point where you need a career change, right? You might need to pause and say, this is not working for me. But certainly depression is a component of burnout. Any other questions or comments? I know as I look in the audience, there's many of us, right, that have contemplated or made career changes recently. And so it isn't something that, is few in numbers. I think many of us consider our options. All right, well, we would like to thank you. We would like to thank the HOPA Programming Committee for allowing us to present I love the fact that HOPA is looking at some professional development. I think we often focus on our the hard skills, and this is nice to have a presentation that talks a little bit more about the soft skills of life. So if you have any questions, you feel free to come up to us at the end, but on behalf of Mike, David, and Patrick, I would like to thank you.